My name is Simon Gough. I'm the author of a book called The White Goddess, An Encounter, which is a fragment of autobiography written in narrative form in an attempt to breathe new life into a remarkable story which occurred over 50 years ago. The story is told entirely subjectively from the viewpoint of a middle-aged man using his memories and his collection of contemporary letters and manuscripts as stepping stones to reach back to the instantaneity of his youth and undo the harm that was to lie in wait for him in years to come. Unlike a professional biographer, I feel under no constraint to be bound by precise dates and times, and for that reason I have emphatically avoided every reference in any biography of my granduncle, Robert Graves, which covers the early 1960s. My memories of those times are mine alone, and I was determined that they should not be distorted or contaminated in any way by the memories or opinions of others, most of whom weren't even there anyway. To me, the narrative itself is far more important than whether or not an event or conversation happened on such and such a day. I want to tell the story as simply and as fluently as I can in the order I remember it. The atmosphere it evokes and the reader are all that concern me. Novels are necessarily contrived. The truth, even the recovered truth, is not negotiable. And yet if I should have inadvertently have hurt any of the people I've portrayed, I apologize with all my heart. 1989. Chaos. It was late one evening in September, soon after I'd come out of hospital with a brand new lymphoma diploma, certifying that I had only 5 years left to live, 7 if I was lucky, when the phone rang. I should have suspected something at once. The telephone's ring had sounded different somehow, rustier, and my whole world tilted sharply to the right as I picked up the receiver. But by then it was too late. I was already drawn back into a path from which I thought myself free long ago. The phone call was from New York, from a man called Foster Grunfeld, whose father had just died, leaving an enormous library in his house on the mountains outside Daya in Majorca, on top of a sheer crag 2,000 feet above the sea. My great-uncle Robert Graves had died some years before, but Beryl, my great-aunt, still lived there in Canaloon, the house she and Robert had lived in since the war, and when Foster asked for advice about selling the library, she suggested that he ring me, because in those days I had a second-hand and antiquarian bookshop in Holt in Norfolk. Although I dreaded the thought of going back to Daya after so many years of silence, I eventually agreed to look at the books, if only to get him off my back. I slowly replaced the receiver while the implications began to sink in. My lips numb, a faint cold sweat on my face as I stared across the study at the old blown-up black and white photograph pinned to the far wall of Daya at sunset, a photograph taken from the garden at Canaloon, looking past the Norfolk Island pine towards the 2 mountain buttresses which towered high above the village. In the deepening darkness of my room, the shadows the tree cast seemed to move slightly as though stirred by draught. This was ridiculous. What was I frightened of? Of memories. Of the past. Of going back. A changed man, perhaps. No, I hadn't changed. Aged, yes, but not changed. Childhood was unchangeable, the last playground of conviction. Everyone and everything remained the same the moment you passed through it, as though touched by the Snow Queen's wand and set in breathless memory. As a child you were given a bag of gold which was soon squandered. If only I'd known as a child that a single bag of gold was all you got, perhaps I would have spent it better. Differently, at least. The next few days were spent in the same state of premedication as I'd gone through before my biopsy. Responses became automatic and unimportant, while time passed like a cloud, painlessly and swiftly, as I wondered what it would be like to go back, letting my remote imagination stray through scenarios of possible encounters, while at the same time trying to re-remember the secret ways between houses and villages and seemingly inaccessible coves. I began to feel like some aging agent provocateur, pulled out of retirement to infiltrate the country of his childhood. There remained the very real problem, aggravated by my complete inability to make a decision of where I would stay in Dea once I arrived. The person I most wanted to stay with was my great-aunt Beryl, whose understanding of things, though seldom voiced, was augural, but whose reactions for the same reason could be harsh. I'd probably left things for too long, though. Beyond good manners, certainly. Beyond even great-nephewly bad manners. The compass point to which I clung now was that it had been Beryl who'd insisted that Foster should get in touch with me. Was it a signal, I wondered, sent in that curious way she had of putting messages into bottles and letting them either sink to the bottom with a shrug or drift off into the human current which restlessly and forever swept past the narrow cove at Dea? Right or wrong, I decided that it was, and made the telephone call that would finally decide whether I would see it through or pull myself out of a vortex which seemed already to be turning with a slow, inexorable momentum. Dígame. Beryl? Yes? It's Simon. Simon Gough. Simon. No exclamation mark, just the certainty of my name. As certain, it seemed, from the lack of surprise in her voice, as her conviction that I would telephone. And at once I was a child again, and she'd unerringly found my latest hiding place. There you are, leaving no room for doubt in either of our minds. Was I going to come to Dea to look at Fred Grunfeld's books? She thought I should. Did I need a bed at Canaloon? Would I like to use her car? I was welcome to both. She couldn't drive any more. Her eyesight had got so bad that she no longer even recognized the people she knocked down. I found it almost impossible to hold a normal conversation while being choked by emotion at hearing the sound of her voice. Yet again, by the time I'd replaced the receiver, I was shaking and sweating. Memory, so innocent and naive in itself, so potentially fatal when stirred, like the coiled snake that it was in its pluperfect lair. The past was not to be trifled with. While the present and future moved at their own irrevocable speeds, the past was time spent, time without energy, which could be moulded and stretched into infinite versions of remembered truth. My sight had become too heavy and dazed to focus on anything except the cavalcade of violent remembered beauty within. Knowing that I would at last reveal it, had to reveal it. I had a story to tell, a love story, a true love story. No one else would tell it now. My past had haunted me for so long that if I didn't attempt to return to it now, lay bare the ruins which had become the foundations of the rest of my life, I'd not only have denied its existence, I'd denied my own. And yet, as eco-archaeologist, I'd have to be very sure of my reasons for disturbing not only the catacombs of my own life, but the sacred tombs of others whose lives, however fleetingly, had changed my own. Admittedly, Robert was dead now and beyond harm. As for Beryl, I could simply ask her permission. If she agreed, then I'd write the story for her, for my family, and for Margot and Alistair. At worst, an explanation, at best, an apology. But above all, I suppose I'd write it for myself, not to be free of it, since my responsibility to it would only increase as I wrote it down, but out of a compulsion to relive it, to draw out my once familiar self from this now stranger's supposedly dying body, like entrails, poring over them in search of reasons and omens for my continued existence. To most people, the past was hallowed ground, never to be disturbed, the last memory before dying. Now, perhaps too late, I'd come to realize that it was a place to take by storm, that somehow I had to smash my way back into that maze and wreak havoc among the classical allusions to inviolable monsters, because the past, as sure as it was once paradise, could as easily become the womb for monstrous chimeras if left unchallenged. As for Robert, if I were to reveal anything of my granduncle, it would be a glimpse into the dark side of his moon. that unexplored face of his personality which was often turned away from his biographers. Who, after all, apart from Beryl and those closest to him at the time, could put a date to an expression, to a bad mood, to euphoria, to a smashed bowl whose destruction stained and littered with regret an entire day's work, or to the moment when the beginning of a poem materialized in a mind which a split second before had been utterly engrossed in the ripeness of a loquat. On that fateful Thursday morning, I found myself sitting at the back of a Boeing jet on the tarmac, looking through the small, rain-spotted windows at the drab 50s council estate of London Airport. One by one, after an audible click, the jet engines were switched on and began to climb the scale of whining until they merged together into a banshee scream, the plastic cabin creaking and shaking in protest at the din. Tail first, we were pulled from our mother terminal like a piglet from a sow's teat, juddering from fury. Interminable minutes later, the plane's temper took a turn for the worse as the turbines surged to a deafening, intolerable pitch. Cramming my fingers into my ears, I hunched forward, eyes screwed up. This was the first time I'd been in a jet, and quite apart from the absence of propellers, I found the shattering noise unnerving. I cast about wildly in my mind for something to distract me. I should have left it blank. My stick disturbed it, and from out of its lair the serpent struck. I hardly felt a thing. As the aeroplane took off into the rain and cloud over London Airport, I was suddenly, almost to my horror, carried back to my boyhood, to my first journey by air when I'd been sent for by my granduncle from the bleak, rather brutal prep school in Northamptonshire to join my mother, who was already in Dare at his invitation, recovering from pneumonia and a very messy divorce from my father. They were both in the theatre, where divorces tended to be messier than most, because it was a close-knit community, and everyone felt they had to take sides. Palma in those days was nothing more than a tiny aerodrome. My first sight of my granduncle, grand as he insisted on being called, great is for steamships and railway lines, don't you think? Grand is for fathers and uncles, and Russian dukes, of course. My first sight of him was of a huge man in every way, 6'2" tall and built like a cross between a prize fighter and a Roman emperor, with a badly broken nose from where he'd boxed for his school and for the Welsh Fusiliers during the First World War. Because she was ill, she was in bed most of the time. I was in Dare. I was left to the no mercies at all of my wild cousin Juan, who was slightly younger than me, but whose private world of outrageous behaviour I had trespassed upon, uninvited. Uninvited by him, at least. 1953. Juan. Nothing I had ever been taught at school or at home could have prepared me for Juan. If he wanted to be bad, he was bad. It was as simple as that. No one could stop him because no one could catch him. He slithered like an eel, ran like a hare, and if he put on so much as a pair of shorts, then it had to be Sunday. He thought his penis was the funniest thing since the wife of the mayor of Dare had apparently choked on the body of Christ at Mass and spat her false teeth into the communion cup. Within moments of our waking up the next morning, he'd burst every pillow in the room, his room, over my head. The place looked like a massacre in a hen house, with feathers muffling every inch of the floor, the books, the pictures, clinging to the ceiling, while he and I, our bodies sweating even at this early hour, were covered in white and orange down from head to foot. As Juan flung open the shutters into the blazing morning, his elder sister Lucia flung open the door to see what was going on, the sudden draught sending thousands of feathers bursting out through the window to rain like soft manna onto the terrace below where Robert and Beryl and my mother were sitting at breakfast. In the pandemonium that followed, Juan simply vanished. Moments later, I was pinned to the wall by my mother's flaying tongue. My shouted explanation that we'd both had nightmares, that we'd been the princes in the tower, and that our pillows had tried to smother us, were dismissed out of hand. Even Lucia's surprising attempts to pacify my mother with stories of Juan's previous outrages were ignored. It wasn't until Beryl arrived that calm was restored at last, and the feathers began to float back down from the ceiling. Then began the hunt for Juan, with Beryl offering a reward of a duro, 5 pesetas for his capture, Lucia offering to bring him back dead for nothing. My adventures with June grew more and more hair-raising and dangerous, to the point where I ended up, for 2 weeks, in the Royal Victoria Hospital for Children on the embankment of the Thames, with a burst eardrum, acute mastoid, and an almost severed fingertip after being stung by a scorpion and trying to get the venom out with a sheath knife. By then, Dea and Canaloon in particular had become my true home, a paradise, a Garden of Eden, far away from the miseries of school life and being shunted from pillar to post during the holidays. Somehow, at whatever a cost, I had to return, and in a fever brought on by another of June's more violent escapades, I performed a self-invented rite of return on top of an ancient tower at the outermost point of the cove. And return I did, in 1959. Having been expelled from public school at the age of 15 for trying to blow it up, but only getting as far as destroying the old sewers, I was eventually taken on by the Manchester Guardian in London, first as a dog's body, but eventually as sub-secretary to the London editor, Gerard Fay. Finally, in an attempt to finish my education properly, my grandfather paid for me to go to the University of Madrid to study Spanish philosophy and letters. My mother had insisted that I stop in Dea on the way, however, to be given a damn good sorting out by Robert. She had very little faith in me at all, with good reason. The taxi drew up on the drive at Canaloon, 1959. At the very moment when Robert burst through the kitchen doorway after Beryl, scattering the fly curtain, looking the very image of my memory of him. Same old shorts, blue Airtex shirts, down-at-heel espadrilles, storming past Beryl. For heaven's sake, Robert, he's arriving, not leaving. It's Simon, darling. I know it's Simon. The three of us grinning, fit to burst as everything came full circle at last, the driver lifting my door off its hinges to let me out to receive Robert's embrace. Gripping me by the shoulders, he kissed me on both cheeks. Welcome, welcome. He kissed me a third time. Thrice welcome, I bid you, grandnephew. Slightly astonished, I glanced at Beryl, who pulled a comical face. Third time lucky, I suppose. Robert ignored her and went straight into his usual what I've been doing today routine. I've just had a cable from Sam Spiegel in Switzerland. He's asked me to collaborate on a film about T.E. Lawrence. Well, I told him to come here and help peel the potatoes. He wants someone called Albert Finney to play Lawrence. Ever heard of him? Yes, of course, I answered. He's very good. And I had to go to the doctor in Solia, Robert went on. I've got the collie wobbles, too much gas, and I don't mean the stuff the Americans put in their cars. Yes, well, we won't go into that if it's all the same to you, said Beryl firmly. But it's made us late, so it's still in the middle of lunch. She beamed at me. We've had yours kept hot for you in case you were hungry. Come on up to the house. Yes, there's someone I want you to meet, exclaimed Robert. She must have held back very properly. Family reunion and all that. Robert was already halfway up the drive as I set off after him, past the low wall of the terrace towards the kitchen doorway where he held aside the fly curtain impatiently. I hurried the last few yards and ducked under his arm, forgetting the step and stumbling with a curse from dazzling sunlight into cool darkness of the familiar kitchen, aware of Robert's banging past me. Don't worry, you'll soon get the hang of it again. Come on, come on. I followed him blindly, his bulk blocking out the light coming through the doorway of the dining room, then stepping from darkness back into streaming light. Margot, Simon, Margot, he cried triumphantly, like a magician, and for an instant it was as though I had been taken in by a conjuring trick, by nothing more than the illusion of someone standing against the window on the far side of the dining room table, a slender body molten in the sunlight. Blundering towards her past Robert's chair, I tried to adjust to the glare as I held out my hand, but her white shirt was ablaze, and the closer I got to the window, the more dazzling she became. She held out her hand just as I raised mine to shield my eyes. So we missed completely the first time. So sorry, I stammered. I can't quite see you. Dark hair, clouds of it. I dropped my hand again to shake hers, just as she raised hers to shield her extraordinary grey eyes. I'm so sorry, she mimicked, and started to laugh, a low, happy sound, so spontaneous and infectious that I didn't even realize I'd joined in at first as I tried to make out her face, which she tilted this way and that, almost convulsed now as she offered me her stunning profiles, then threw back her head. Robert was staring at us in astonishment, laughing but seeming unsure why, and disliking it. "I say, have you two met before?" he yelled suddenly. Behind him the others had crowded into the dining room, bemused by our behaviour at first, then somehow swept up in our weird intoxication, even the dogs, who began to bark hysterically. I glanced round at my granduncle, no longer happy now, but increasingly desperate, eyes suddenly violent with a strange inner panic. "No, that's enough! Stop it!" he shouted. "Stop it, I say!" Good.